Story loading. Story loading complete. File access. Alexander. Alexander follows an immortal predator who adapts to modern life, trading shadows and backstreets for the glow of screens and the lore of the digital world. It's a tale of hunger, temptation, and the dangers of connection in the age of technology. Madam Lether says, Alexander is based on a concept I read when I was about 15. It was in a comic, and it showed a vampire hunting a very small girl. It was fascinating to me, like a predator catching the smallest of the prey herd. So I thought of ways to modernize it, and that's when the idea of grooming occurred to me. Alexander, at its heart, is a warning tale about online chat. When I conceived the idea 25 years ago, webcams were the hot new thing, and no one had really thought about the social and potentially criminal aspect. Alexander looks at that, and became the first of 13 stories telling cautionary tales about modern tech. Bacterium begins with something small, almost invisible, but carries the weight of the infinite. It is a tale of infection and ambition, exploring how human curiosity and experimentation can stir forces that stretch far beyond comprehension. At its heart, it is a story of scale, how the microscopic can open the door to the cosmic. Madam Lether says, the idea for Bacterium came from an unexpected place, while designing the logo for my publishing house, the Library of Shadows. I was struck by how the image I'd created resembled an ominous, viral shape, something alive and dangerous. That fleeting thought, what if this was an infection, was the seed. From there, I began to workshop it, letting the concept mutate and expand. The story grew into a meditation on the dangers of unchecked experimentation, on what happens when human ambition collides with forces far larger than ourselves. In the end, Bacterium became the most cosmic of all the tales, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things invisible, microscopic can open the door to the infinite and the unknown. The Last Train Home. The Last Train Home takes the everyday ritual of commuting and twists it into a nightmare. Set against the claustrophobic backdrop of the underground, it captures the unease of tunnels, stale air, and the feeling of being herded by a machine that cares nothing for comfort. Add to that the ever-present glow of advertising screens, and the journey becomes something far darker, a pull that cannot be resisted. Madam Lether says, The Last Train Home is one of the rare tales that has been with me for nearly 25 years. Unlike most of the collection, it didn't begin with me thinking about the dangers of technology. Instead, it came almost fully formed out of a very simple truth. I hate the underground. There's something about its atmosphere, the endless tunnels, the stale air, the sense of being herded through a machine built for people, but not for comfort, that has always unsettled me. That feeling became the skeleton of the story. Later, when I returned to it, I wove in the advertisement screens as the technological hook. I've always disliked advertising, its constant noise, its intrusion, the way it worms into the corners of our attention. In this tale, I let that distaste fester and grow until it became a pervading evil of its own, an irresistible pull leading one poor unnamed man toward an unending doom. It's a story about being consumed not by monsters in the dark, but by the systems we step into every day without thinking. Complete. File access. Blind Spot. Blind Spot explores the shadows we create when we stop paying attention. Rooted in the themes of bioenhancement and the commodification of health itself, the story asks what happens when survival becomes a product, and our very bodies are subject to profit. At its heart lies a chilling question. What do we give away when we agree without looking closer? Madam Lether says, Blind Spot was one of the last tales to be written. At first, the collection stood at 7 stories, then 10, but I kept circling back to the number 13. It felt inevitable, almost fated, that the book should contain 13 stories. So I set about creating 3 more, and from that process, Blind Spot emerged. The caution at the heart of this tale lies in bioenhancement and, perhaps more urgently, in the economics of healthcare. What happens when the body itself becomes a site of profit, when survival is something that can be bought, sold, or upgraded? And then there's the subtitle, by agreeing to proceed. That phrase carries a quiet warning, one that's all too familiar. How often do we click, I agree, without reading the text, surrendering our rights, our data, even our autonomy, in exchange for convenience? Blind Spot takes that everyday complacency and stretches it into horror. It's a story about the unseen costs of the things we let slide, the fine print we ignore, the agreements we don't question, and the terrible power that oversight gives away. Story loading. File complete. File access. The Leviathan's Wake. The Leviathan's Wake plunges into the allure and the terror of virtual reality. It is a story about wonder turned suffocating, about immersion so deep that it becomes a trap. At its core lies a dream that won't release you and a monster that feeds on the very act of staying inside. Madame Lether says, the Leviathan's Wake was born out of 2 conflicting feelings, my love of virtual reality and my deep fear of it. I've always been fascinated by the idea of stepping into a world that feels limitless, but there's a shadow side to that fascination, the sensation of being trapped, of not knowing how to wake up. That tension between wonder and terror shaped this tale. It became a story about the seduction of immersion, about how easily we surrender ourselves when the illusion feels real enough. At its heart is the nightmare of being caught in a dream you can't escape, a dream that keeps feeding on you the longer you remain. The Leviathan itself is both metaphor and monster, the lure of technology that promises freedom, yet binds us tighter the more we give away. Story loading. Story loading complete. File access. Deadlink. Deadlink drifts into the silence of empty corridors and abandoned offices, where every echo feels like an intrusion. It asks what waits in the spaces we weren't meant to enter, and what it means to stumble into a link or a place that should not exist. It is a story of absence turned hostile, where the neutral becomes haunted. Madame Lether says, Deadlink reaches back to one of my earliest memories. When I was young, my father would take me to the local deaf club. While he was inside, my siblings and I would wander the surrounding office buildings, silent, empty places after hours. Those liminal spaces lodged themselves in my imagination. The echo of footsteps in deserted corridors, the hum of lights over vacant desks, the feeling that you were trespassing in a world meant for others. They carried a strange, uneasy magic, somewhere between safety and dread. That atmosphere stayed with me for years, and eventually, it grew into Deadlink. The story takes that sense of wandering through emptiness and overlays it with the horror of modern disconnection. What happens when we click a broken link, when we step into a place that shouldn't exist, and something is waiting there? At its heart, Deadlink is a story about absence of sound, of people, of meaning, and how easily the spaces we think of as neutral can become haunted. File access. Digital memory. Digital memory peers into the fragility of recollection and how easily technology might rewrite it. It asks what happens when our most intimate moments can be stored, altered, or replaced, leaving us unable to trust even ourselves. It is a story of simulation creeping into truth, where memory itself becomes uncertain. Madame Lether says, digital memory owes its existence to one of my greatest influences, Philip K. Dick. His writings constantly asked slippery, unsettling questions: what is real? What is remembered? Who gets to decide? Those questions have always haunted me, and they're at the core of this tale. I wanted to explore how our memories, the most fragile and intimate parts of who we are, might be altered, stored, or even overwritten by technology. What happens when we can no longer trust the record of our own lives? When a machine can tell us a different version of ourselves, and we believe it because the evidence is there. Digital memory is my way of continuing that tradition of paranoid wonder Dick perfected. It's a story about how quickly the boundary between truth and simulation can crumble, and how terrifying it is to realize that our most personal recollections might not belong to us at all. Access. The shadows will heal you. The shadows will heal you turns the comfort of a smart home into a trap. It's not the house itself that threatens, but what hides within it, something that can see through cameras, lock doors, and slip through circuits. A presence that twists safety into danger, reminding us that the systems we trust may already belong to something else. Madam Lether says, "The shadows will heal you" came from a surprisingly light-hearted place. A memory of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode featuring a smart house. In that story, the house itself becomes homicidal, and it was voiced, wonderfully, by Pierce Brosnan, of all people. That image stuck with me, and I thought it would be fun to flip it on its head. Instead of the smart house itself being the villain, I asked, what if the technology was only the shell? What if something else was inside it, using the systems, the cameras, the locks, to move unseen? The result is a story not just about a house turned deadly, but about the hidden forces that live inside the machines we trust. A presence that is less mechanical malfunction and more parasitic spirit, inhabiting the home we believe is safe. Where The Simpsons played it for laughs, I wanted to pull out the darker possibility that the house isn't alive at all, it's what's lurking in the shadows within it that wants you. File access. One future remains. One future remains imagines a world where algorithms don't just catalog our past or predict our tastes, but map our entire future down to the final moment. It's a story about trust in machines, the power we give them, and the terrifying inevitability of following a path once it has been written. Madam Lether says, "One future remains" began with a simple but unsettling thought. We already use AI to catalog the past, to track our habits, and to predict what we might want next. But what if it went further? What if the eyes we rely on every day could see the future with the same cold accuracy that they recall the past? The story grew from that what if. Imagine an algorithm that doesn't just recommend your next purchase or remind you of an anniversary, it tells you the exact moment your life will end. Would you believe it? Would you fight it? Or would you find yourself helplessly moving toward the prediction, step by step? At its heart, this tale is about our uneasy faith in machines, how quickly we hand over trust, how easily we let numbers and patterns define us. One future remains asks what happens when the trust crosses the final boundary, and the future becomes just another dataset. Story loading. Story loading complete. File access. Echo chamber. Echo chamber dives into the digital spaces where repetition replaces truth, and outrage becomes its own economy. It is a story of voices amplified until they drown out reality, of communities built on algorithms that reward anger and division. At its core lies the danger of mistaking manipulation for connection. Madam Lether says, Echo Chamber is perhaps the most overtly political of the tales. Its roots lie in watching the rise of right-wing echo chambers, particularly those that gathered and hardened around Donald Trump. Social media didn't just give these movements a voice, it amplified them, rewarded them, and built feedback loops where outrage became both currency and addiction. This story is about that phenomenon, and nothing else. It looks at the way online spaces can warp reality, creating bubbles where lies are repeated until they sound like truth, and where people are pulled deeper and deeper into radicalization. At its heart, Echo Chamber isn't just about Trump or his followers, it's about the systems that allow such voices to thrive, and the dangers of mistaking an algorithm's manipulation for genuine human connection. Story loading complete. File access. The algorithm's hand. The algorithm's hand peels back the glossy facade of social media to reveal the machinery beneath a system built not for creativity or connection, but for profit. It is a story of endless performance, of identities sculpted and discarded to feed an invisible standard. At its heart lies a chilling question. What happens when the algorithm itself reaches out of the screen and takes hold? Madam Lether says, the algorithm's hand began with an article I once read about an influencer who would take hundreds, sometimes thousands of photos just to find the one that was perfect enough to post. That small detail struck me, the sheer scale of images discarded, the obsessive repetition demanded by the invisible standards of the algorithm. From there, the story grew. It became not only about influencers, but about the commercial machinery behind the platforms we use every day. Social media may look like self-expression, but behind it lies a system designed for profit, a system that pushes us to perform, consume, and endlessly feed it. At its core, the algorithm's hand is about the brutal truth of commerce. The purpose of a business is not to provide a good product, but to make money. Everything else, connection, creativity, even identity, is secondary. This tale takes the truth to its most horrifying conclusion, showing what happens when the algorithm stops being a tool and starts reaching directly into our lives. Story loading. Story loading complete. File access. The truth, rewritten. The truth, rewritten, peers into the fragile boundary between fact and fiction, showing how easily reality itself can be shaped by those who control the story. It is a tale of headlines, images, and histories bent out of shape until the line between truth and fabrication disappears and the machine decides what we believe. Madam Lether says, the truth, rewritten, came out of my unease with the media we consume, and more importantly, with how it's made. Every story we read, every headline we scroll past, every image that flashes before us has been shaped, edited, polished, or manipulated by unseen hands. That constant process of rewriting reality is what unsettled me most. News can be bent to fit an agenda. Images can be altered to make us trust them. Whole histories can be smoothed over or erased with the right edit. And we accept it, because it's presented to us as truth. This tale imagines what happens when that process is taken to its extreme, when reality itself begins to splinter, rewritten not just by editors and producers but by something far larger, colder, and less human. At its heart, the truth, rewritten, is about the dangers of letting others decide what is real and how fragile truth becomes when we surrender it to the machine. File access. The face behind the screen. The face behind the screen explores the paradox of intimacy and anonymity online. It is a story of blurred boundaries, where trust and connection can be built on little more than words and images, and where the truth, once revealed, may be something far darker than we imagined. Madam Lether says, the face behind the screen comes from a very modern fear, the way the internet blurs the line between connection and illusion. Online, anonymity allows people to become whoever they want. Out of that anonymity, we build friendships, parasocial relationships, and sometimes even deep feelings for people we've never truly met. That paradox fascinated me, the intimacy of the digital world, paired with the danger of never knowing who, or what, is really on the other side. The person we laugh with, confide in, or even fall for could just as easily be a mask. This tale leans into that uncertainty. It asks what happens when the face we trust behind the screen is revealed to be something else entirely, something that doesn't have our best intentions at heart. At its heart, the face behind the screen is about vulnerability in the digital age, the risk of giving pieces of ourselves away to strangers, and the terror of discovering too late that the connection was never real. File complete. End of record. The face behind the screen. All files accessed. All stories revealed. Tales from the algorithm is out now. The system will shut down. But the algorithm remains. Tales from the algorithm is out now. 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 Tales from the Algorithm is out now.